Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's ACM Tech Talk. So this talk is part of ACM's commitment to lifelong learning and professional development, serving a global membership of computing professionals and students. My name is Eve Anderson. I'm Senior Director for Product Inclusion, Equity, and Accessibility at Google. I'm also a member of the ACM Professional Development Committee, which is the group that puts on these talks. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with ACM or what it has to offer, here's some more information. ACM offers educational and professional development resources that bolster skills and enhance career opportunities. And we're showing some of the highlights here on the screen. So just to call out a few of them, ACM provides access to the ACM Digital Library, which is the world's most comprehensive database of computing literature. Leading publications and global conferences that draw top experts on a broad spectrum of computing topics. Support for education and research, including curriculum development, teacher training, the ACM Turing and ACM Prize in Computing Awards, and the ACM Code of Ethics, a collection of principles and guidelines designed to help computing professionals make ethically responsible decisions in professional practice. So before we get started with the exciting part of this, I'd like to also mention a few housekeeping items. And these are shown on the slide in front of you, but let me just call out a few. If you have questions at any time, please type them in using Zoom's Q&A feature. And I will be organizing the questions as Jenny speaks, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. The session is being recorded. It will be archived. You'll receive an automatic email notification when it becomes available. And you can check learning.acm.org for updates on this and any other upcoming talks. At the end of the presentation, you'll see a survey open on your screen. Take a moment, please, to fill it out to help us improve our tech talks. Today's presentation is The Evolution of Accessibility by Jenny Lay-Flurrie. And I am going to read an awesome bio of Jenny. Jenny Lay-Flurrie is Chief Accessibility Officer at Microsoft. Her team is at the forefront of creating positive experiences that apply technology to make a difference in the world and the lives of individuals. From how Microsoft hires and supports people with disabilities in employment to innovative technology that aims to revolutionize what's possible for people with disabilities. She founded the Disability Employee Resource Group at Microsoft and is currently one of the executive sponsors. She created the Disability Answer Desk, which provides specialist customer support to people with disabilities, with over 1 million calls handled to date, and hosts the annual Microsoft Ability Summit, which focuses on empowering more than 13,000 registered attendees with the inclusive and innovative thinking necessary to enable people around the world. She's also been instrumental in projects such as the Autism Hiring Program, Soundscape, and the Microsoft Ability Hackathon, which has supported over 500 hackathon teams building technology for people with disabilities. Jenny was recognized and nominated as a technology groundbreaker by CEO Satya Nadella in Wired magazine, and is a contributor to the book, The Ability Hacks, which shares behind-the-scenes stories of the hackers who pioneered 2 innovative hack-turned solutions used by people with disabilities worldwide. Outside of Microsoft, Jenny is on the board of directors of Disability In, Gallaudet University, and Team Gleason. She was recognized as a Disability Employment Champion of Change by the White House in October 2014, and is one of Fast Company's most creative people in business in 2017. And I'm going to add one more thing to the bio, which is that Jenny is an amazing collaborator, and thanks to Jenny's generous spirit, Google has become even better at accessibility because we work together. So thank you, Jenny. And now, without further ado, now you can take it away.
Oh, finally, thank you, Eve, and thank you, folks, for joining. It's always hard when someone reads a bio. I'm kind of, the British in me kind of cringes a little bit. But it's such an honor to be here. It's such an honor to be invited. And Eve, thank you for your sponsorship and thought and leadership in this industry. It was because of folks like Eve that I get to do what I do today. So I'm going to take it away. I'm going to, hopefully my screen is up. You all will scream at me if not. Wonderful. I'm taking nods as and a thumbs up. So I'm going to walk through a little bit on accessibility, a mix of learnings that we've had as a company, as Microsoft, and learnings that I've had on this journey of now, gosh, 18 years in the company. 16 here in the US and 7 in this position as CAO for Microsoft. I'm not going to cover everything. This is a big, vast, huge universe, but I want to touch on a few key things that I think are really important to think about as you consider, as you embrace accessibility as a key part of designing, building, creating, maintaining, supporting customers with disabilities around the world. So let's get going. The first thing to talk about is a little bit on the history, and maybe to give some context of where we come from and how I got into this gig. So accessibility has been around a long time. I'm not going to cover the entire history of accessibility. That would be like one massive topic and would probably be a 2-hour seminar. So we'll save that for another time. But just to give a little bit of the sprinkling of how companies like Microsoft got into this gig. Our journey actually began as a company in 1975, and with disability began in the 90s. It began with really 2 very separate, very disconnected strands. One was our employee of peoples with disabilities. There were actually 3 groups at Microsoft that started back in the 90s. That included our deaf community, our blind community, our VIP community, visually impaired persons, which is not the politically correct term these days, but they love being called VIPs, and also our ADD community. Separately, there was a lot happening on the nerdy side, on the accessibility and engineering side. This was the genesis of some of our first screen readers that went into some of the very early versions of Windows. In fact, our first feature that we found in the history books and the archives is a feature that is still in Windows today, which is sticky keys. If you hit enter too many times, you may have seen this pop up, or you may be a user of it yourself. It is for folks with mobility, and it gives gorgeous, quick, easy shortcuts. That was in 1994. If you spin forward, what you found over the times in our company, which was fast growing in those years, was a little bit of convergence, but it was still kept quite separate. You had a growth in the employee community, and it went from 3 groups to, when I joined the company in 2005, 6. And you also had a little bit more infusion of accessibility into the core, with the establishment of a dedicated team on accessibility, working in multiple parts, whether it was part of our engineering team or part of then our trustworthy computing team. The world did pivot a little bit for us in 2014, 2015, for a couple of things. One is we had a new CEO come into play, Satya Nadella. Satya is a force of nature, and he was also the then exec sponsor of our disability ERG. He was a parent of a kiddo with disability who sadly passed away this year. And he is a dedicated and passionate leader about disability and accessibility. I was then the chair of that disability ERG. I privileged even now to think back to those years and the time spent really learning. He walked into the first meeting that we had. I had this beautiful 45-minute presentation prepared, which we didn't cover any of. Instead, we talked about the state of technology and where things were great and where things were not. And that was really the conversion that happened. There was a new mission to the company that was established for the entirety of Microsoft. to empower every person, every organization to achieve more, which is rather fabulous when it comes to accessibility. It means we don't need anything different than that. That speaks everything we need it to, because at the core, accessibility is about inclusion. And then I was privileged enough to take this job at the end of 2015. What's happened since is we've been working on our own journey on building muscle that empowers us to deliver on that within everything that we do, and a convergence, because at the core of what we do is empowering people with disabilities. So infusing people with disabilities and their strength and expertise into our products, into our physical buildings, into our hiring processes, our support processes, and making it so that accessibility is a core part of how we live and breathe at Microsoft. And then last year, we were like, hey, let's take it up a notch, and let's get after some of the learning from this period of the pandemic that we are still living in, and start to tackle the disability divide, the social inequity that exists for people with disabilities around the world, which is really profound when you look at areas like employment, education, healthcare. The sad reality is that people with disabilities are unemployed or underemployed to double the same parameters as people without disabilities yet. But we all know that disability is a symptom of age. It's also something that can happen as a result of a disabling event like a pandemic. It's never been more important to work on accessibility than it is today. So that's kind of our gig. Let's give you some under the cover on how we do it and some of the learning from that journey, some of what's gone well and some of what maybe hasn't. And I think the first thing to really talk about is the ecosystem. The ecosystem, I would say, going back 20, 30 years to spinning forward to today, if you would put it in one sentence, is that accessibility used to be thought of as a ramp. It used to be thought of as a digital engineering gig to make something compliant. If you spin it forward to today, it is about making sure that you are infusing the expertise of people with disabilities to create an ecosystem of inclusion, leaning on the principles of accessibility. It's bigger. It's about everything that you touch and everything that you don't. And so how do you do that in a scalable, systematic way that isn't a one-off effort that then dies or disintegrates or stops at certain parameters, whether that is legal compliance, and doesn't realize the potential of innovation, understanding that the law, while beautiful and incredibly important, is woefully behind the use of technology today. That's where it's important to think about this, and I put a slide up that has concentric circles with technology, workforce, workplace, and people going out in concentric rings. Thinking about it as an ecosystem gives us the ability to go after a bigger set of goals that aren't just about making sure that a website or a SharePoint or a piece of code is accessible, but you're starting to realize the innovation potential that is all around us. Now you can operationalize that, and some of what we did was to really start to think about this as a business. And for those that are business nerdy, that does mean maturity models, which I love. I'm kind of nerdy myself. I come from that core. People think that I'm a disability accessibility, but really I'm an operationalist, and I love scorecards, and I love thinking through maturity of where a business is and where it needs to go, and understanding that we're not perfect, but I like progress over perfection. And so in order for us to understand where we were as a company, it meant going and grabbing a bunch of maturity models, figuring out if they work for us, and then editing them and customizing them to what works for us. What I got on the page is a graph. It's a graph of 5 levels. It's got the inputs of a Carnegie Mellon model, a level access model, and the Microsoft Accessibility Leadership Team. Those 3 groups basically was what came together to create our model, which is essentially taking all the wisdom that we could from every other model that we could find, and then taking it up a notch. Some of the things that we took up: was making it so that compliance was a level 2 to 3, not a level 5. Compliance shouldn't be the goal. It was also spreading it across our business. So actually there are 7 dimensions published on this. So what we do every year, and we're in the thick of it here, actually internally, is we assess ourselves across 7 different dimensions of the business. That's not org structures or who does what, that is functions. So product development, people and hiring and culture, sales and marketing, procurement, which is a really important one. We have 20,000 suppliers, and if we're not buying accessible goods, we're not going to be delivering accessible goods, no matter what those goods are. Right the way through to how we innovate and how we drive that forward. By giving us ourselves some definitions and criterias, it gave us a slightly more objective way of understanding our progress over time. And it's really helped. So Microsoft, in the time since we came in with my team, which sits in the corporate external legal affairs division of Microsoft, we're surrounded about 40% attorneys, about 1,500 people in this gig. My peers run societal programs like racial justice, disinformation, sustainability, privacy. It's given us a tool to be able to understand where we are and where we need to go. And then working with that leadership team, which are wicked people. Can I say that? 1980s. I did say it. So done. But amazing people from across the whole of the organization who are accountable and report to me, collaborate with me to work on accessibility. It's how we scale as a function across a company this size, which is now over 200,000 employees. Collectively together, this means that we run it like a business. And we also keep a track of trends, and we keep a really important pulse on how accessibility is viewed across the company. Since 2015, we've seen an enormous growth in the number of people in this company working on accessibility. It used to be a volunteerism role, and I would say broadly for the industry, really a volunteerism gig. It's not no longer. Now, there will always be people that come to this to volunteer, to learn, to infuse or add it to what they do as an engineer building a piece of nerdery. But the whole industry of accessibility has expanded and accelerated. LinkedIn is part of our umbrella of companies, and it gives us a great amount of insight into how that, and gives us some stats to back it up. And I would say that the last 2 years has been the biggest increase in the number of accessibility roles since we were able to start tracking it. In 2020, those numbers grew by 78%. Now that still means just 12,000 jobs in the US focused on accessibility, and I still think that's underreported. But it's one indicator, and we're going to continue to track it. Another indicator we're starting this year, which is that at LinkedIn just added accessibility and a list of accessibility jobs, which we popped on the page: architect, manager, advocate, analyst, engineer. Those are now roles that you can add if you're looking for a job. That's brand new. So if you're out there and you want to get into accessibility, you have relevant experience, or you want to get experience, these are ways to essentially advertise to recruiters that you are looking for a position in accessibility. Why this sudden acceleration? Well, a few factors coming together. The pandemic and virtualization of workforces put an increased onus on the importance of accessibility on everything that we do. Everything. It meant that as we were all working on making our products better for the virtual workforce as we switched in 2020, we were also getting an increased demand on accessibility jobs to help with that, as customers were understandably asking for better access to captioning, for increased access to the ability to be able to view a PowerPoint slide, or neurodiverse features. That drove an increased demand from corporates and companies asking for more people to join their company to work on accessibility. And then there's also the legal landscape as well, with increased action here in the US. Bottom line is, accessibility is not just a great field to work with, and I'm going to show you how cool it is in a minute. But it's also a growing industry, and it's one that we need and encourage people to join. And I will say lastly on this, I was really happy to see one particular job title join this page, which is Chief Accessibility Officer. Well, Eve and I do that job today, and Eve and many others do that job. It is an area where we need to see more in this industry. The job that I have is to hold Microsoft accountable and to help to motivate, to drive in a carrot and stick way our future forward. Every company needs that person, and they need that team, and they need that function. So that one was my little plea to LinkedIn. Please add it to the page. And I was really glad to see it come through. So let's just talk about the coolness of accessibility and kind of why I got into it. And let's talk about inclusive design. So inclusive design is kind of a wicked thing. Now, I won't go into the difference of inclusive design and universal design. Both exist. They are slightly different, but let's just dig into this one for a second. Inclusive design is a methodology. There's lots of people who have different viewpoints on it. It's still emerging. It's still getting documented. And there are books, many of them, that are written and to be written on this subject. But the bottom line is that this is all about recognizing exclusion, harnessing the insights of people in order to create great technologies. If you design through the lens of one, then you will actually create great things for all. And this stems back in the history of time. For those that work in accessibility, you're like grown because you know these examples, like the magnetic zips, fluorescent lighting, handles, which were created by physical therapists, not the knobs, but the handles so that you could use your elbow. I love the wave door openers, although they're not helpful for everyone, but aren't they awesome? Also great if you have a coffee in your hand and you're carrying a laptop and you've got your bag and you're trying to badge in. You don't have to do anything. You can just wave your hand. These are all great examples of technologies that have been designed through the lens of accessibility, through the lens of exclusion and inclusion, that have then netted future technologies to come through. The picture on the right-hand side is one that's just a good example of that. This is a new technology that actually is coming out very soon, that we announced earlier this year, which is a mouse hub and hub. What's so different about it? Well, it was designed by a team working with people with varying different mobility disabilities, from cerebral palsy to muscular dystrophy to arthritis to any number of different fatigue disabilities that exist. Took the traditional mouse. I actually have my traditional ergo here that I use because I get tendonitis. But took that mouse and then was like, well, how can I edit it? How can I change the mouse so that it adapts to the person? It actually is a structure that empowers me as a person with a disability, depending on how my fatigue is on that given day or how my disability is presenting on that day. How do I take this and how do I make it adaptable to me? And so that mouse has a little snap on the bottom of it that makes it left or right-handed. Which is really, really cool. Just with one click and you turn it around and it's left or right-handed. But you can also take off the front of it and detach the back and add a different tail. There are 10 tails that go with this that we've already got 3D printed for. We're also putting all the specs online, so you can just download this and 3D print yourself, or you can order them for an affordable cost. That is just one example of how you can design a structure in a scalable way that can adapt to everyone. Now, the hub and the buttons are the same principle. This is one simple square hub, and then what you can attach to it on the top are lots of different tails that allow you to use a different joystick. There's one that I like to call the Dyson, but I'm not allowed to call it the Dyson, but it's shaped like one of those air circulators that allows you to grasp it and turn it. All of which, again, they've got 8 different points of action on them, and they're programmable so that what you can do is make it so that with one click, I could enter into the chat window been lovely to see you all. Ta-ra for now, and exit the call with one click. Programmable, adjustable, with one snap, you've changed the actual joystick function to match your needs. Again, all of which will be popped online so you can download them yourselves or order them online for an affordable cost. All done by a team working with a host of individuals to understand their needs. It's just the easiest way of describing the importance of inclusive design. This is kind of the gig as to why I moved into this. I joined Microsoft in 2005 to work on Hotmail, which someone out there is old enough to remember what Hotmail is. I do, I still have mine. And then eventually got into the deaf community because I'm deaf, hard of hearing. I do not hear speech, even though my voice is amazing. And then through the deaf community, created the disability ERG, and then found my home, which was accessibility. And working, my first project was to work on captioning for our company meetings. We had those in one of those baseball fields, which is really not good for acoustics. And no one could understand what anyone was saying. It wasn't just the deaf people, it was the whole room, the whole stadium couldn't hear. And that was how I got into this, was working with a whole bunch of people across the community to figure out how we could improve, working on a proposal to build a captioning installation, adding that to the next company meeting, and then seeing the impact, not just from the deaf, hard of hearing community here, but every single attendee who could finally hear what the leaders were saying at the front of the stage. The same exact principle of inclusive design, making things better for everyone by designing through one and then extending it over time. If you then look at kind of the core of that design principle, you've got to have some of the engineering principles to go along with it. So yes, this is the coolest space on earth, but we should never forget the foundation that we come from. I'm going to float 3 quick. Again, folks, accessibility folks, please forgive me for floating these, but I feel like they're really, really important to always flag. And we should never forget the foundation of what has to be done to every piece of code that we touch, and why it matters. There's 3 L flags. One is keyboard navigation. Why does it matter? Because we all need to be able to have environments that everyone can access. Keyboard navigation is just the simple notion of having all controls navigable by keyboard. That means essentially by Alt Tab and being able to move through, or by arrow keys. In the absence of this, a screen reader or a piece of assistive technology that a person is using cannot get through the page, or cannot get through the page in the order in which it was designed. It then becomes horribly confusing, you miss information, and this matters. It's a simple principle, but it's the core foundation to what we do. Number 2 is exposing information. Having it so that the details are utterly precise in there. So the name, the role, the value of an element on the page. It's providing the contextual information for screen readers, for ATs, and screen readers vary. There are lots of them out there. We all have screen readers built into our operating systems, and then you can download other screen readers like NVDA or JAWS. These read out the page, but they are dependent on the information that is included within, that is coded within. It is an example on the page, and there are quick little GIFs that we put just to explain what these are. But the examples on here is that you've got the name best fruit and the roll combo box, value banana, state collapsed. And then you can see that it's actually got the details listed within. And the third, again, core basic, but I will say that this is the #1 bug that we see in everything that we do across every product that we run, is contrast. So when I'm looking at the number of bugs in the system on any given day, whether it's Windows, Office, gaming, Azure, whatever it may be, the contrast is always the sticky wicket. For people who are colorblind, low vision, and by the way, colorblind is 9% of the population, mostly white male. It is a much bigger thing than people realize. other vision disabilities that exist, you gotta have good contrast between foreground and background. What does that mean pragmatically? It means you gotta think about your colors. There are some really, really, really easy tools out there to use that you can quickly download that give you a quick assessment of color contrast, because there is a ratio guideline of 4 to 5 to 1. Bottom line is, if ever you see one of those adverts out there, and I love the adverts where you get like a pink background and then you get orange on the front of it, and you're squinting, you're going, no, I can't read it, and my glass is bad. No, it's because the color contrast is bad and they haven't done the accessibility check. That's when I giggle and I send a note to their accessibility person, say, hey, did you know that you're missing color contrast on your ad and it's really not good? Which I do all the time. This is probably the easiest bug that anyone and everyone can and should fix. But I would just give it some forethought and make sure that all of these 3 things at a rock bottom minimum are part of your process as you're building the core foundation of your house, and then you're innovating to meet the potential of inclusive design. Eva's grinning, so I know she's probably got the same. Yeah, it is the bug that gets us all. If you get those 2 combinations together, then you start to get fun stuff, right? So you got the core foundation of your house, and by the way, it's not just 3. There are a few more than 3 things, but I just wanted to cover a couple of the basics. He's like, it's definitely more than 3. And then you start to innovate and you start to realize the potential of inclusive design. Then you start to get some really cool stuff coming on the back of it. Both of these take time. They take time to get the systems, the scalable infrastructures to support them, but they don't take a lot. And it moves quicker than you think. That's some of my biggest learning from the last 7 years. But there's 2 examples I popped on the page. One is the Xbox Adaptive Controller. And the backstory on this one, it came out a few years ago now. This was one of the hackathon projects. We have an ability hack every year. We actually just had it last week. We have hundreds of projects and teams and thousands of people working on disability projects. This was a serial hack team. They came back not 1 year, but 2 years with 3D printed versions of a controller that was designed and built for veterans coming back from war and needing respite and wanting to game. They were using welded versions of controllers. Those welded versions were expensive and were tough to maintain. And so it was, how could we find a controller that would deliver the right experience, that looked good, because that is important, but also gave the functionality and adaptability for the mixed shift of experiences, whether it was being able to move a switch with your foot, with your thumb, or with your one-handed. So on the pictures on the right is that adaptive controller. It is a white box with 2 switches that are black round circles. That is A/B switches. And then on the back is a variety of different ports, so you can add in whatever switches work for you. It's also got an up-down arrow key function on the left-hand side. It's Bluetooth, it's Wi-Fi, it's all the good stuff. It was designed with an organization that brought people with varying experiences, so it went through inclusive design, and it's also fully accessible. It's both pieces coming together. And then Windows 11, which I would say we're on a journey with our operating systems. We all are, but really proud of the progress here, because some of the foundational elements are now just part of how it grooves, which means that we can now start to leap and jump forward on innovative experiences that will take us forward, and the industry giving us a good guidance here. So yes, this has now, true to my heart, captioning heart in the that is available online, offline in the core of Windows 11, which just went live last week. It's got voice access, again, in the core. It's got beautiful high contrast settings, which have really cool names. It's got the ability to control a mouse with your eyes. It's got not just the core, but it's starting to do things that are going to lift us forward and make it easier for everyone to use computing, because computing should be easier for everyone to use. That's what accessibility is going to do, is power more personal, more interesting, more adaptable computing. And then, of course, you've got AI. Now, I hesitate to speak because Eve's a really big expert on this, so just shut your ears for a bit. Yeah, I was like talking to the professor while but AI is a really important space for us all. It is and has the most enormous potential for us to make a difference, but it has to be built right and it has to be managed right. There's a saying on here: AI systems built by and with the disability community will reflect a wider spectrum of users, leading to greater innovations for everyone. That's a fancy way of saying what I just said. But what is really important is that we've got to have disability data embedded into AI, and that's got to be information that comes from people with disabilities across the spectrum of disability. So everything that you can see, which is only 30% of disability, and everything you cannot, neurodiversity, mental health, and more. And then once you have that information, we have to be keenly aware of privacy, security, and bias to ensure that it is used in the right way. The reality is that there's not enough data that comes from people with disabilities today. That's been termed the disability data desert. And it's something that we're all working on to add and infuse and just accelerate the amount of disability data that is in AI that can be used for machine learning, that will then give us more intelligent, more helpful results on the back of it. So whether that's data for our Seeing AI environment, which is one of our really cool apps designed with and for the blind, making sure that the pictures, as it recognizes pictures using AI, that those pictures are taken by people with disabilities, so it can recognize white canes, guide dogs. It can recognize implements, really important devices that are really important to those users, and doesn't exclude that data because the volume of it is small. There's lots of examples of great projects happening here. And I would say that most companies do have an AI program running. We have an AI for accessibility program that's got some really cool ones coming through that are working across the spectrum of the disability space. So a couple of examples. One is Mentra. This is neurodiversity hiring, and that's their really big focus. They're working on a talent platform. And what they're doing is using AI to make sure that they are appropriately gathering the right talent pool into there and targeting those roles to the right individuals. AI is really important. The right focus, non-bias, or embracing of bias, understanding of bias, is really important in the hiring systems. And so pushing forward on one spectrum, neurodiversity in this instance, is really important because there'll be profound learning for many more as we go forward. And also data. I had the chance to meet up with these folks last week on a check-in in New York. But this is working with the World Bank to actually build a more global view of disability demographic data. World Bank is an incredible organization. We're leaning on their expertise as disability experts with Fordham University to build and coalesce a enormous data bank of information that will give us a more accurate lens on disability demographic information, and also build the architecture that will be scalable and be able to go from 43 countries to hopefully the full number around the globe. Why does this matter? This matters because the disability demographic data is horribly aged. In fact, the 1 billion plus people with disabilities that we all quote here is data that stems from 2010. And you know, that given what we've just gone through in the last 2 years, that's horribly old. And it's just important to make sure that we also lean into the architectural components to empower organizations like World Bank to do this at scale. Bottom line, as I close out and start to pass back to Eve, is a couple of key things. One, all of this has been done for people with disabilities. I'm really proud that Microsoft has gone through the journey of growing its, well, what started as 3, when I joined 6 groups, is now 22 different groups within the disability ERG, and has a disability representation of June last year of 7.1%. That, by the way, is still underreported. It still isn't our goal of achieving parity of our employee community matching the percentage of our community externally, but it talks to the power that our community have here, the empowerment that they have, how they bring their expertise to the front of the room, in every room, is really important. And the expertise that they're infusing into what we do is really accelerating. Having that ecosystem is the only way to do this gig. Only way to do it in a scalable, long-term thinking kind of way. And I think that's why we're so invested in hiring talent with disabilities. If we don't have talent with disabilities, we're not going to get the cool stuff on the other end. And so this is one program of many, the Neurodiversity Connector, which is bringing in people with neurodiversity, which could be dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, and opening the door to that talent in the interviewing process, ditching the problematic process of what are your strengths and weaknesses, which if you're autistic, kind of result in a, I'm just good, which is what my 15-year-old says when I ask her that question. Her autistic brain, which is very black and white. Now, how was your day, kid? Good, mum. You don't need to know any more than that. It's just good. The gray is not going to be something that naturally comes to the front. And I'm really proud that we're working with companies like Google, Ernst & Young, Spectrum Designs, and many more to now share that talent. So you apply once, and with the right approvals from those employees and those candidates, we're able to pass those resumes to other companies should they not meet the specifications of the JDs that we have open. And the last is that nothing that we do is done alone. Tackling the disability divide, well, those numbers haven't changed in 30 years. There's no one company that can do it alone. In fact, in order to change the employment rate by 1%, you would have to hire 500,000 plus people with disabilities. We have 200,000. So there's no way that mathematically you can do this alone. And so some of the organizations that we're working with and the many others that we hope to work with is how we believe that we can have an impact in this space. And I encourage everyone to be thinking not what can just you do, but what can you do in collaboration with others to make an impactful difference. With that, what I miss, Eve.
That was fantastic, Jenny. Thank you so much for this. We have some questions, so let's let our viewers tell us what you missed, Jenny, with the questions. But actually, the first few are ones that were submitted before your talk. You definitely answered parts of them, but I still think they're really well-crafted, interesting questions. So let me pose these to you. So the first one is, as the world population is aging and mobile technology is rapidly advancing, should there be any dedicated accessibility solutions for older people to bring better user experience while accessing smartphone applications, specifically stock apps, considering their accessibility challenges? Should there be a dedicated smartphone for people with accessibility challenges?
I actually think there is. There are some great companies doing some great work in the space. So maybe just step it up a minute. Yeah, aging is clearly a big part of our consideration portfolio. It is for anyone working on accessibility, because the reality is aging is closely correlated with disability. The demographics of people born with disabilities that we know of is around 5%. As opposed to at the age 65, it's around 50%. So if you're not in our cool gang today, you're likely coming our way. And so infusing those considerations into the process is really, really important. And I know there's several companies that have been working on dedicated hardware, software solutions. But I think for us, it is about making sure that we live through the principles that we have for any product that we build. It is easy to find, easy to use, simple to get to where you need to go, and it's delightful. And delightful is a word that kind of it actually came from our Windows team, but I love it. It's such a great. It just depicts everything that you ever need with this gig. It's got to be something where I can give to my parents, to my grandparents, and say, here you go, and they're not going to get confused by every button, which I end up then being tech support for, which if you're in technology, you all know we're tech supports for our parents on this thing. So yes, I think there's a mix here of making sure those elements are embedded into UI and into design and build, but also there are instances and an ecosystem and a need that I think supports dedicated hardware software solutions.
Thank you. The next question is, what sort of challenges you face while making decisions where you have to put the logic of universal design on top of business needs? What advice would you like to give to the design community to implement the universal design as a discipline rather than just a practice? And I know you touched on this, but do you want to expand it all on that?
I think the biggest challenge on a daily basis is that there is a limit to the number of hours in the day. And so if you talk to any engineering team, it is always that wrestle of what do I prioritize versus time and resource. And so it's getting that clear prioritization matrix down on paper that's simple, easy to follow, easy to use. And balance that with the reality of, look, we'd love to make sure that every single bug is hit, done, and out the system. In an accelerated technology circuit where when I joined, we were launching Windows every 7 years, and not always a good version of Windows, but we were launching every 5 to 7 years, whereas now it's twice a year. The reality is you are going to be dealing and fielding that on an everyday basis. So it comes down to that clear prioritization matrix that makes sure that you have an understanding of severity of those issues, that you prioritize those that have user impact right off the bat, that you have clear channels of feedback that come from your users into the engineering systems, which is why that support team that I run, the Disability Answer Desk, is so critical, because we take 10,000 calls a month. Those calls get siphoned into engineering bugs and feature requests, and then we can clearly prioritize those. So it's having that ecosystem that goes from user into engineering diligence to allow everyone to feel like they're tackling the right thing in the right order, in the right way.
Absolutely. Thank you. Maybe if I could just add one tiny thing to that.
Yeah.
So Jenny, you and I both work in these kind of central accessibility organizations within our companies that then work with all of the product teams across the company. And one other thing that we can do to make the decision to prioritize easier for our product teams is to just make accessibility as easy as possible. Make those clear design guidelines, create the automated testing tools, build things into our engineering environments and our design systems and so on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The more that we can make it so that it's just a easy button, the less you're going to hear the feedback of I don't have time to do this.
Yep. Okay, the next question. How do you, or how does your company decide on whether it's worthwhile to do a significant project aimed at improving life for people with disabilities? Soundscape and Seeing AI are examples of these things.
Well, I'm the worst at that because I want to do everything. But bottom line is it comes down to prioritization. And it comes down to, if I talk about Seeing AI for a second, that was another hackathon project. It was an incredible team. They won one of the hackathon chapters here. I think it was the US chapter they won. So it's a gang led by a blind developer, full of folks with accessibility expertise, low vision, blind. It then floated to the next round, and it was in the perfect place at the perfect time of AI just coming to the fore, this incredible illustration of the power of AI. So it got a lot of business support as well as accessibility support. It illustrated the power of inclusive teams. So it was this great cornucopia of just magic that came together at the right time. Others have had much tougher journeys. You're having to create entirely new business based on an innovation or a design. So in fact, Adaptive Controller was one of those. That was an entirely new side branch of a really big business. And so I do think it's about being stuck in the business reality with some of this, remembering what building your bank and making sure that your product, your prototype, your whatever it is so golden. But then we have to look at the big landscape, and we have to say, well, what are the technology areas we want to invest in? What are the parts that we're hearing from customers and community that we really need to pitch to? What are the parts that are underserved and we have an opportunity space? What new technologies are coming on the segment? Where do we have business support? I mean, it is really, I think the more you can think about accessibility like any other part of your business, the more impactful I think, and the quicker and the simpler things will be to get things from hack to prototype to market.
Absolutely. So the next question came during the talk, and it's really a clarification on the concept that you told us about technology being built for one. And this question is, how can inclusive design work if you solve the challenge for just one person, but each person with a disability or older adult is different?
Then you think about scale. And so if you go back to that mouse, it started actually on the back of the adaptive controller. It was some of the same folks from that who saw an opportunity to edit the mouse, and it was a parent of a kiddo just seeing the impact that my mouse was so needed, but it was so hard to use. But if you go through that design process, they didn't just speak to one person. They didn't rely on just that one kiddo's experience or that one set of insight that came from adaptive controller. They spoke to many. And the end solution is about designing for her. It is actually about a scalable solution that is adaptable. So, I may need something today, or you may need something today, but you may not need it tomorrow. So it's got to be able to flex with a human and also flex to the true diversity of human. And even in the mobility space, there is a profound difference between muscular dystrophy to cerebral palsy to rheumatoid arthritis. And so you've got this solution where now we've got a mouse, but everything else is just, you can download it and print it yourself, or you can order it online and plug on the tail that you want or you need on that given day. So scalable solution, I think. Again, thinking about this, not designing through that lens, but I'm using my hands, Eve. I'm not sure if that's helpful in any way, shape or form to go from like one to many.
Thank you for that. And actually one of the questions in the Zoom Q&A is somebody thanking you for pointing out that sometimes disabilities can present in different ways on different days. So I think that came up again in the question you just answered. So the next question is a fun one related to AI, which you talked about. With today's advancement in tech, are companies like Microsoft thinking about using physical sensors to detect movements as well? Meaning no physical device, but a design/software to successfully sustain a mouse function just based on finger movements.
Oh, hold on. I want to make sure I understand this. Maybe you got that one better than I did, Eve.
Yeah, I think the person is really talking about sensor technology. So instead of having to press a key or move a mouse, being able to do something that maybe requires less force. And you actually talked about being able to control a mouse in Windows 11 using your eyes. So I think you gave a perfect example of that.
There you go. You see, you got it. Sensor, yeah. I think that the industry is moving in lots of ways, lots of varying ways. Here, eye is one of them. A lot of the hacks I'm seeing right now are about haptics. That could be understanding I've got my hand around my wrist, because often this is a very sensitive area that you get a ton of insight from, very, very small movements. There's also a much future focused area looking at brain signals. And then you've got eye control, which is a huge and important space, particularly for people with ALS, where that degenerates your muscles, often with the exception of your eyes. So Steve Gleason is one example of an amazing human, but to someone who communicates solely through their eyes. So yeah, I think, what do you think, Eve? Sensor technology? I think it's like at the moment going up.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, it's been present for years. If you think about the late Stephen Hawking and how he had a sensor just detecting cheek movement. And so I think it's all about moving it from being, can you do something using sensors? Yes, you can. To, can you make it usable? Can you make it efficient? Can you give people who are using sensors parity in how fast they get things done?
I love that example. Stephen Hawking, when I met with him, he was typing 1 or 2 words a minute. You just have to breathe that in for a second. You've got someone with a brain the size of a planet typing 1 or 2 words a minute. Steve Gleason typing 15 to 20 a minute at the top end of what's capable with current technology. So it is, how can technology help you to deliver on your daily needs? I would love Steve to be able to argue with his wife using technology. Arguing is such a real thing that you've got to be in the moment on. I just think that's a really important design notion.
Well, Jenny, this was so fun. Unfortunately, our time here is coming to an end.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Eve. It's been an honor to do it with you. So
thank you. Well, so I'd like to thank Jenny again for her informative presentation and insightful answers to the many questions. And a special thanks to everybody here today for taking the time to attend, to participate, to ask questions. This talk was recorded. It will be available online in a few days at learning.acm.org. You can find announcements on upcoming talks and other ACM activities at learning.acm.org and at justplainacm.org. Also, please, everybody, fill out our quick survey. It will give you an opportunity not just to tell us how we did on this one, but also you can suggest new topics, new speakers, help us understand what would be helpful for you. So on behalf of the ACM, Jenny Lay-Flurrie and myself, Eve Anderson, thanks again for joining us, and I hope you will join us again in the future. And that's all, folks.